You're listening to The Jacob Valk Show. He's breaking down the latest and greatest in sports as only he can. Follow him on Twitter at RealJacobValk. Here he is, Jacob Valk.
Hello, sports fans. Welcome to another edition of the Jacob Valk Show. I am Jacob Valk. And at the end of this show, you're going to get the interview that I did with David Ostrowsky, the author of the book about pro sports in 1993. He's a really nice guy. I did like talking to him. I have to start by previewing Packers-Niners. Two really good teams that have been decimated by injuries. I mean, it's really sad. You look at this game, and the first thought that pops into your head is, wow, this is going to be a great game. You know, there's nothing on, so I can sit back, relax, and enjoy watching this stacked Niners roster go up against this stacked Packers roster. Well, that's really not going to happen here. For starters, the Packers running backs have been decimated. Aaron Jones is questionable for this game. It looks like he's on the wrong side of questionable. Is it possible he can play? Obviously, but I wouldn't bet the rent on it. A.J. Dillon has the coronavirus. Jamal Williams is out also. The Packers could be down to their fourth and fifth running backs, Dexter Williams and Tyler Ervin. Williams hasn't carried the ball once this year. Tyler Ervin has only carried it 4 times. Now, admittedly, he's gotten 43 yards off those 4 carries, so that's impressive. But he's played 5 games, and he only has 4 carries. No one's going to be mistaking him for Paul Hornung anytime soon. Kevin King is out. Will Redmond's out. Kamal Martin has the coronavirus. David Bakhtiari and Rick Wagner are questionable for this game. I mean, I'm not saying those guys are superstars or anything, but they do play important roles on the Packers. Now Matt LaFleur is going to have to roll out this patchwork roster. The one good thing is it's possible Allen Lazard can come back for this game. But even if he is, he's not going to be at 100%. This is a shell of what the Green Bay Packers can be. They're 5-2. The roster that they're going to put out tonight isn't one that can go 5-2. Now, having said that, they still have Aaron Rodgers. They still have Devontae Adams. Robert Tonyan is having a really, really good season. Marquise Valdes-Scantling is solid. The offensive line looks really good. Corey Linsley, Elton Jenkins, Lucas Patrick. Billy Turner's a really good pass blocker. When you have Aaron Rodgers, nothing else matters. your offense could be comprised of 10 guys picked from the local train station. But if their quarterback is Aaron Rodgers, that team's going to have a chance to win. It's just that simple. All throughout his career, he's made lemonade out of lemons. It's a shame that the Packers never gave him an all-star supporting cast. It's a big question mark in modern NFL history. How many Super Bowls could Rodgers have won if he had an all-star receiving core? But with a replacement-level receiving core, he has one, he's a Super Bowl MVP, and he's a future Hall of Famer. He's doing something right. Defensively, the Packers have struggled this year. They've allowed 26.7 points per game. That puts them just inside the top 20 of NFL teams in terms of points allowed per game. That's not very good. Yes, they have Jair Alexander. Yes, they have Zadarius Smith. Yes, they have Adrian Amos. Yes, they have Kenny Clark. But other than that, no one scares me. Preston Smith isn't having a good season. Dean Lowry isn't having a good season. Rashawn Gary isn't having a good season. Darnell Savage isn't having a good season. The thing that's going to prevent the Packers from going on a big playoff run, I'm not saying they won't make the playoffs, but what's going to prevent them from being a major threat in the playoffs is the fact that their defense is so bad. Mike Pettin has not done a good job with that defense. So naturally, a competent offense should be able to light up that defense. It doesn't need to be a fantastic offense. It just needs to be competent. Unfortunately for the Niners, the offense that they're going to put out tonight isn't competent. You take a look at everyone who's out for them. I'm just going to rapid fire the names at you. Deebo Samuel, Kendrick Bourne, Trent Williams, Brandon Ayuk, Jimmy Garoppolo, Tevin Coleman, George Kittle, Jeff Wilson, Raheem Mostert. Who's left? Seriously. Tell me who's left. The Niners only have one fully healthy wide receiver on their roster. That's Trent Taylor. Richie James is questionable, but no one's going to be mistaking him for Jerry Rice anytime soon. You take a look at the practice squad. River Craycraft, Chris Finke, and Kevin White. There's a reason those guys are on the practice squad. They're not that good. Ask any Bears fan about Kevin White, they'll tell you. He wasn't that good. Nick Mullins is going to be throwing to him. All due respect to Mullins, he's not a bad backup, but he's not the kind of guy who can turn this wide receiver core into anything special. Hell, Garoppolo can't do that. Their running backs are going to be Jerick McKinnon and Jermichael Hasty. Not exactly Roger Craig and Frank Gore. And on the defensive side of the ball, they're still shorthanded. Very early on, Nick Bosa and Solomon Thomas went on injured reserve. Ezekiel Ansah is out. Dee Ford is out. I mean, the Niners' defense has actually been solid without them. They're a top 10 defense right now in terms of points allowed per game. Jason Verrett, Fred Warner, Arik Armstead, DJ Jones, Kerry Hyder, and Kevin Givens have done a really good job filling in. But they're not Bosa. They're not Ansah. They're not Ford. Aaron Rodgers is going to have a field day lighting this Niners defense up. I don't think the Niners offense is going to look dreadful. The Packers defense is so bad that Mullins will be able to hold his own and do a couple nice things. But it's not going to be enough for this game. The Niners are just too shorthanded. The Packers are shorthanded too, but this is the equivalent of a 4-on-3 power play. The Packers would like to have 5 guys on the ice, but it's okay because the other team only has 3. Give me the Packers tonight. Moving on now to the Rangers, locking up Ryan Strome for 2 years at $9 million. And this is a great move for the Rangers. Ryan Strome started out like a bat out of hell with the Islanders at the beginning of his NHL career. He had 18 points in 37 games his rookie year. Then his sophomore year, he had 50 points in 81 games. He was a plus 23. He got Selke Trophy votes. It looked like he was going to be a really good player for the Islanders for a long time. Then he just fell off a cliff. His play dipped dramatically. He was sent down to Bridgeport at one point. Think about that. He followed up a 50-point season by spending 8 games in the AHL. He only finished with 28 points that year. The year after that, he was a healthy scratch in some games. The Islanders were able to turn him into Jordan Eberle because of Peter Chiarelli's stupidity. But Strome never really got going in Edmonton either. He went to the Rangers and immediately turned it around. 2 years ago, he had 33 points in 63 games. Last year, 59 points in 70 games. He was a plus 21. David Quinn has done a sensational job in developing him. I mean, the big question I have is why Strome failed with the Islanders. Why did he fail with the Oilers? What did Quinn do to unleash Strome's full potential? We all knew he was talented, but after his sophomore season, he was never able to put it all together. I wish I had the answer for you. I really don't. Maybe Strome saw the writing on the wall. You know what? If it doesn't work out here, I'm probably not getting another chance. So he may have buckled down and worked harder than he's ever worked before. I mean, it doesn't bother me that Strome is doing this with the Rangers. Like I said, the Islanders turned him into Jordan Eberle. Eberle has been a really good player for the Islanders. Not great. Maybe a little less than some Islander fans hope for, but he's been a really good player for this team. 2 years ago, he had 9 points in 8 playoff games. Last year, 14 points in 22 playoff games. The guy does show up when you really want him to. Eberle does have stretches where he just disappears, but then when the lights are on bright, he turns it on. So it doesn't bother me that Strome is doing this for the Rangers and not the Islanders. It's worse for the Oilers. They traded Strome to the Rangers for Ryan Spooner. Spooner didn't play a game in the NHL last year. He only played 25 games for the Oilers in the 18-19 season before he was traded to the Canucks for Sam Gagner. Yeah, that saga didn't work out for the Oilers. But back to Strome. If you're the Rangers, you didn't want to lock him up to a crazy long-term deal because there is a chance he can regress. I don't think he's going to, but you didn't want to sign him to a crazy 4 or 5 year deal. 2 years is more than fair. $4.5 million a year is more than fair. This is a great move for the Rangers. Alright, here's my interview with David Ostrowsky. You're listening to the Jacob Valk Show. I am Jacob Valk, and I'm fortunate enough to be joined by David Ostrowsky, the author of Pro Sports in 1993, a signature season in football, basketball, hockey, and baseball. David, how are you, buddy?
I'm doing well, Jacob. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing good. So, I'm going to start this interview off by paraphrasing one of the best movies ever, Casablanca. Of all the years, in all of time, in all the world, why do you write about 1993?
Well, that's a good question, and it's one that I have been asked many times over the past 4 years since I started writing this book. I started working on it in very early 2017, and to be honest with you, there's not necessarily one way to answer that question. To start by saying, as a lifelong sports fan, I kind of fell in love with sports in 93 when I was 9 years old. And to pinpoint one reason, although, like I said, it's difficult, I go back to Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls, and I just have very vivid memories of Jordan's Bulls going up against Barkley's Suns in the NBA Finals that year, of course. And, you know, the more I think about it, I realized, I mean, that was such an important year in Jordan's life. I mean, not only did he retire, and then, you know, his dad died later that summer, but, you know, he had the whole gambling issue, and he was probably the most famous athlete in the world at that time. So I think just looking at it from the perspective of Jordan and the Bulls, I think 93 kind of speaks for itself. But the book's far more than just Jordan. It looks at, you know, some other dynasties that were going on, and I think one of the ones that really deserves a lot of attention is the Dallas Cowboys. You know, 93, they were on top of the world in terms of, you know, it was America's team and their resurgence in Dallas and all that. So in short, I mean, I think you're looking at some different dynasties. The Toronto Blue Jays that just won a second consecutive World Series. And, you know, I mean, let's be honest, every sports year is special. But I think when you look at 93 in the context of what happens afterwards, I think you'll see there's a lot of kind of depressing developments. In 94, the baseball strike happens. There is no World Series. Jordan retires, right, in 93, the end of 93, excuse me. And the 93-94 NBA season is just a lot less interesting with him not playing. And whenever the Knicks are in the NBA Finals, you lose my interest. That's right. Of course, the Knicks and Rockets played the Game 7 in 94. But, you know, I think without MJ in the league, obviously, it was just very, very different. And then hockey. the last time a Canadian team won a Stanley Cup to this day, and it's been 27 years.
Isn't that crazy? When you really stop and think about it, isn't that crazy?
It is, yeah. And the fact of the matter is that no other Canadian team has gotten even that close to a Stanley Cup title.
I mean, we've had a few teams in there. The Canucks made it about 94. A decade ago. Yeah. But, yeah, it's really weird when you stop and think about it. So
I know that's a long-winded answer, and like I said, I wish I could pinpoint one unifying theme, but hopefully, that provides a little insight into why I thought this year was just a little extra special, I think, in the context of the time and compared to, what happened afterwards.
Hey, any reason I get to paraphrase Humphrey Bogart, I'm taking it.
There you go.
So we'll go through the book's chapters in order. What can you tell us about the end of Joe Montana's career?
So, it's interesting. Joe in 91, well, let's start, the story kind of starts in the mid-'80s when the 49ers acquired Steve Young from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Tampa Bay Buccaneers drafted Vinny Testaverde with the number 1 overall pick, okay? And they basically had enough of Steve Young. They just did not think of him as being the long-term solution there. Quite frankly, he had a pretty underwhelming career in Tampa. So he gets traded to the 49ers and presumably to be the backup for the foreseeable future. Montana gets some injuries in the mid-'80s. Young spells him in a playoff game against Minnesota, plays pretty well. But then, Joe is amazing in 88 and 89. He's, in his early 30s, but he wins back-to-back Super Bowls. So he's your guy. But then 1990, in the NFC title game, Leonard Marshall knocks him out with a few minutes left. And Montana's elbow is totally ruined. So he's sidelined for the entire 91 season, doesn't play a snap. Meanwhile, Young is just playing amazing. Playing at MVP caliber. In fact, he wins the award the next year. In 92, Montana's again sidelined, but he's healthy, so it's pretty obvious. He's only 36 years old, so this isn't like, Brady right at 43. He's 36. Still has a lot left, not that Brady doesn't, but plays very little in 92, plays, half the game, second half, season finale, meaningless game against the Detroit Lions, but it's Montana's team, and so it's just very, very disappointing for Montana. He doesn't want to go out this way. He's won 4 Super Bowls. He's, in the discussion, greatest quarterback all time, and he is not going to, go down by holding a clipboard on the sideline. So at that point, the writing was on the wall, and, Young, like I said, was one of the best quarterbacks, if not the best quarterback in the NFL, and the 49ers, had no choice but to send him to a different team.
Yeah, and he played really well for the Chiefs his last couple seasons. They made the AFC Conference title game his first year there. They lost to the Bills. Second year, not as good, but Montana was still good. It's just kind of sad when you stop and think about it that that's how Montana's career ended. He ended it with the Chiefs. He should have ended it with the Niners. Would you agree with that?
I would. I mean, I think, you look at other teams, and this happens all the time, right? Like, whether you're talking about Brett Favre or Peyton Manning. And I think, most people would agree it was kind of a better send-off than those guys, even though, of course, Manning did win a Super Bowl in his last year. But he was, only obviously a fraction of what he used to be. I mean, it was a fairly nondescript ending in terms of, I guess, what he, the final result in 94. They lose a wild card game to the Miami Dolphins. And, he kind of limps to the finish line. He's not 100% healthy. So, again, I think let's be honest, he's not nearly as effective as what Brady is at 43.
No.
But that being said, Kansas City was a franchise that had been struggling mightily ever since Marty Schottenheimer became head coach, in the late 80s, early 90s. Hadn't been to the Super Bowl since Nixon was in office, okay? So, for this franchise, just having Montana there instead of a Dave Craig was huge. I mean, in terms of, getting, the excitement. And even in the training camp in Rivers Falls, Wisconsin, it was a whole different scene. So, No, I mean, was it the greatest send-off ever? Probably not. Like I said, it was a little anticlimactic. But, when you look at for the franchise and, just him going up against John Elway in the AFC West in '94, he played his old team, the 49ers, it was exciting. And, again, like I said, just the fact that he basically didn't play at all since the 1990 season, that's where I think it was a story.
So, can you lay out the 1993 MLB All-Star Game?
Yeah, absolutely. So, 93 MLB All-Star Game, this was before MLB Network, ESPN was around, SportsCenter was around, but they weren't what they were today in terms of having all these out-of-network games. If you were a fan of a National League city, you weren't seeing Camden Yards. In fact, even if I grew up as a Red Sox fan, you really were only seeing
Oh, wait a minute.
Camden
I'm
Yards.
going to hang up on you now. I'm a Yankees fan. I'm going to hang up on you now.
Yeah, right. I saw that with your background. But, if you saw, you didn't see Camden Yards so much. So what was Camden Yards? It was the new trend-setting style of ballpark that went back to the retro times, where a ballpark was in the city, and it was a stroll, from people's houses, from their offices. It was a retro style. It was not a uniform cookie-cutter park. It did not open in 1993. Camden Yards opened in 92. It was the All-Star Game, though, that showcased Camden Yards on a national scale. And literally, for the first time, you had thousands, if not tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of baseball fans laying eyes on Camden Yards. Just to give you, kind of a comparison, the All-Star Game in 94 was in Pittsburgh in Three Rivers Stadium, right? The classic, donut hole, uniform dimensions, concrete, turf, uniformity, all that bad stuff. But this was really the first time where so many fans, got to see Camden Yards on a national stage. The Orioles weren't particularly good now, keep in mind. This was before the streak, Ripken, that whole thing. So, again, it was kind of like this, secret. And as we all know, in the past quarter century, literally dozens of teams have adopted the retro style. And the game itself wasn't, there were some neat little storylines and, things with Musina, warming up and not ever getting in the game and, things like that. But the game itself was a little kind of blah. But again, like I said, it was this introduction of Camden Yards to the national audience.
And Camden Yards is such a beautiful ballpark. I've been there multiple times. I was at Camden Yards the day after Mike Flanagan unfortunately passed away. I implore every baseball fan to try to make it their business to go to Camden Yards. I hope you've been there, David, have you?
I certainly have, yeah. And when I was doing research for this book, I was able to get over there. So that was my first time. And, while it doesn't have the bells and whistles of maybe like a Petco Park or the ballpark in San Francisco, whatever they're calling it now, it's really neat how they make it fit into the context of the city, with
right.
The warehouse there. And, it competes favorably with the row houses. And it just, everything about it is really natural. I guess that's kind of the word I would use. And like I said, it's a trend center. Yeah.
It's aesthetically pleasing, beautiful ballpark.
And the location, downtown.
Center of downtown Baltimore. Talking to David Ostrowsky, the author of Pro Sports in 1993, a signature season in football, basketball, hockey, and baseball. So now we'll get to basketball. Will you be able to describe the 1993 Chicago Bulls?
Yeah, so it's interesting. It was basically my first year, as I mentioned earlier, really getting into, sports, the NBA, Michael Jordan. And it's fascinating because when I started researching this year, the 92-93 season, of course it began in 92, I think for the Bulls, it was kind of like, and certainly for Jordan and Pippen, it was kind of like, here we go again. We've already done this twice now. They beat the Lakers in 91, right? First title. Of course, the big thing there was getting past the Pistons in the conference finals, and it was kind of like, a formality basically because Magic Johnson was at the end of his career, as was James Worthy. Same thing following year against, Clyde Drexler and the Trailblazers. Again, it went to 6 games, not really a lot of suspense. Clearly the Bulls were the better team. So they're asked to do this three-peat, and on top of that, Jordan and Pippen are coming off the Dream Team. So they essentially had hardly any off-season, right, because they had just played deep into June in the 92 finals. A few weeks after that, they're training, and then they're, in Barcelona. They come back. So it was interesting, and I think Phil Jackson was a little bit ahead of his time in terms of managing their minutes. Not that, they sat out many games, but I just think in terms of practicing and training and things of that nature. So there was friction on the team, especially from Horace Grant, another veteran who, was not on the dream team. And, there was kind of a double standard, right? There was kind of rules certainly for Jordan and even for Pippen and everyone else. But, again, I think for those of you who are familiar with the Bulls in the 90s, the Jordan Rules book came out in 91. And, Jordan had a lot of issues with certain teammates. But those were, I think for the most part, better now than they had been in 89, 90, 91. He's still his dominant self. The team doesn't win as many games. They won 67 games in 92. I think they won I want to say 57 or 58 this year.
God, only 57 wins.
Yeah. They're the class of the Eastern. Well, they're not actually.
I was going to say the Knicks were the top seed that year.
The Knicks were the top seed, right, which meant they played the Charlotte Hornets, I want to say, in the first round, if I'm not mistaken.
I think you're right.
No, the Pacers, because the Celtics played the Hornets, and the Bulls played the Hawks in the first round.
Yeah, Bulls played the Hawks.
Yep. Yeah, the Bulls. So the Bulls were the 2 seed. Like I said, New York finished with a better record. The Bulls only won 57 games, but New York, Pat Riley's guys, they had gotten some, pretty key, made some pretty key off-season acquisitions. Doc Rivers, Tony Campbell, guys, who were tough defensive players. So, anyways, the Bulls cruised through the first 2 rounds. Hawks, no big deal. Same thing, the Cavs, the next round they sweep them. And then the conference finals for the Knicks, first 2 games in New York, Knicks win. But the storyline of the series is not that. It's, Jordan's gambling thing, which today probably would not have been a big deal at all. But in 93, a guy going out and, to Atlantic City on an off night, being out till whatever he was, there's different, takes on it. Some people think he was back at 1 a.m. in his hotel. Other people think he was back much later. But that was a whole tabloid-fueled distraction, and, people were talking about it and everything. And the funny thing is, he plays 2 nights after that. He has his best game of the series. He scores 55 points, and the Bulls win 4 games in a row. So they're off to the NBA Finals. They're, most competitive team they're playing in this, 90s dynasty up till now. It's league MVP Charles Barkley and the Phoenix Suns, and the Bulls win in 6. And, Barkley's the MVP, but at the end of the day, Jordan still showed he was the most dominant player. And, that's the 3-peat. And then, of course, he goes off and retires a few months later and tries this baseball thing.
Yeah, not his best move. I mean, certainly he was affected by his father. His father was a big baseball fan, and that was a big reason why he left. But my father saw Michael Jordan play baseball live, and he told me that it was not a good experience. So should have just stuck to basketball. He could have had 8 straight NBA titles. He really could have.
I think about that a lot. Would have Olajuwon and Drexler, because Drexler, of course, went to Houston. Would they have won 2 in a row? I don't know. You know what I mean? If he had not played, he, of course, came back in 95, but he took off the whole 93, 94 season. It's possible. Yeah. I mean, he was 30 years old when he retires. So, you do the math. He's still, a young, very young guy. And, of course, he wins 3 more after that.
Unbelievable. So, what can you tell us about the 1993 Stanley Cup Finals?
Well, you kind of had at the time the best team, of course, the Canadiens, versus the best player in Wayne Gretzky. Gretzky's playing for the LA Kings, and they fall to the Canadiens 4-1. It's not really that competitive of a series. The Kings take the first game, and then the Canadiens win the next 4. Got a couple of lucky breaks in overtime. But I think the story of the series, if not the whole postseason, was the play of Patrick Waugh. Patrick Waugh is the Hall of Fame goalie who won a cup in '86. He did not get off. He didn't have a great season in 92-93. He had a really tough postseason in '92 against the Bruins. The Canadiens got bounced. He's having a bad year. He's an incredibly popular player, but there are fans who were starting wondering, gee, is it time for this guy to go, whatever. Anyway, the Canadiens win 10 straight overtime games that spring in '93, and Watt in overtime is obviously perfect, or else he would have lost. So he goes over, 100 minutes without letting up a goal. And, I think he's really the story of this team, of this postseason, and ultimately the season, just how utterly dominant he was. I memean, here's a guy who, he's got these superstitions. He talks to the goalposts. He's a little nutty, but he's, at the end of the day, he is the difference maker. And, I talked to several players, Canadians and the Kings, and they all kind of agreed. As Gretzky, it was interesting. He missed the first half of the season. At 31, he had this back injury he had been dealing with, and he needed surgery. And he comes back, and he's not his dominant self, but in the postseason, he's pretty good. The Kings battle the Leafs in the Campbell Conference Finals, and Game 7, he has a hat trick. And, he's arguably, one of the top 2 or 3 players in the game. But like I said, Patrick Waugh and the, overachieving Canadians shut them out. And as it turns out, as we talked about earlier, the Canadians are the last Canadian team to win the Cup. You had the Southern strategy in the NHL where all these Sun Belt teams in Tampa, Dallas, Arizona, Carolina, I'm sure I'm missing some others, Dallas, they're
Southern California.
Exactly, yeah, Southern California, Anaheim, San Jose. So the game that started in Canada, Original Six, a lot of those teams were Canadian. They have not won a Cup since the Canadians did so in '93.
Yeah, and that series was kind of interesting because of the illegal stick penalty that McSorley got in Game 2. Really the turning point of that series. I'm sure you'd agree with that.
Absolutely. I mean, somehow, Jacques Demers, the coach of the Canadians, had some inkling that, Marty McSorley, player for the Kings, had some kind of a doctored stick. And, he called over he had his captain, Kirk Muller, call over the ref, Kerry Fraser, to examine it. And lo and behold, it was. And what did this mean? In short, well, Montreal was down 2-1. And then the final 2 minutes, and once McSorley's stick got found, he was in the penalty box. They had a man advantage. They ended up tying it, and then they won it in overtime. And that tied the series 1-1, and the rest is history. They won the next 3 games, 2 of which were in overtime. So, I don't think there's any dispute. That was the turning point.
Unreal. It's something that if it was put in a Hollywood movie, people would write it off as being too unrealistic. And that's how the Stanley Cup Finals turned on its head.
Yeah, that was in Montreal at the time, so, you can just imagine the kind of momentum that gave the Canadians. They really had a lackluster performance in Game 1. They lost 4-1, and they just got totally dominated. Waugh was not himself. And, that was if they had gone down 2-0, heading back to the Great Western Forum in L.A., and, all their fans there, and they had some pretty good fans, then it was over. They weren't going to come back and win 4 out of the next 5.
No way. No chance on earth where the Kings going to blow it 3-0. So, can you lay out the 1993 World Series?
Yeah, Blue Jays back in it. Blue Jays have one of the better lineups, I would say, certainly in the 90s, as it turns out, if not really. In the second half of the 20th century, they have just top to bottom, a really good lineup, leading off to Von White. They added Ricky Henderson, so he actually led off starting in August. But, their 3 best hitters, their 4 best hitters, Paul Molitor, Joe Carter, Robbie Alomar, and John Olerud are all on top of their game. Molitor's 37, but he's just having a great year and has an even better World Series. And, this World Series is going to go down as Joe Carter, the game-winning home run in Game 6. The last time the guys hit a walk-off home run, only the second time ever. Of course, since Bill Mazeroski did it in 1960. But, they're Blue Jays are great. They won in 92. Perhaps in 92 they were a little bit more dominant than 93, but, more or less it's a similar team. Dave Winfield was gone. He was there in 92, so they have Paul Molitor instead. Interesting thing about this series is they're facing a team of really just overachievers. The Philadelphia Phillies, a team that was really bad in the early 90s, and no one gave them a chance. They're not a team loaded with all-stars and future Hall of Famers for sure. They have John Kruk, they have Kurt Schilling, they have Darren Dalton, Lenny Dykstra, but again, not exactly household names. They take him to 6 games, and it looked like it was going to Game 7, and Mitch Williams, wild thing, closes on the mound, and in the bottom of the ninth in the Sky Dome, he's 1 out away from ending this, and up by a run, and then Carter, of course, it's a 3-run homer, and again, like I said, the following year there was no World Series, right? 2 years after that, when there was a postseason, you had the wild card, so it was no longer this AL East, AL West, NL East, NL West thing, right? A division race that went in. I mean, heck, the San Francisco Giants won 103 games in 1993, and they didn't make the playoffs. You'll never, ever see that again, and that's because of the realignment. So, it was a fun season.
The 93 Giants lost a big game that year, 12-1. I don't remember the circumstances, but I know that was the score. The thing about the 93 Blue Jays, and the 92 Blue Jays for that matter, is you're right. Those teams were incredibly dominant, but because of the strike, because of the rise of the Yankees, because of the rise of the home run, the rise of steroids, that team has gotten lost to history. I'll rattle off the names. Pat Borders, John Olerud, Roberto Alomar, Tony Fernandez, Ed Sprague, Ricky Henderson, Devon White, Joe Carter, Paul Molitor, Juan Guzman, Pat Hentgen. The bullpen is stacked. Dwayne Ward is at the top of his game. It's one of the greatest teams in not just the back half of the 20th century, one of the best teams in baseball history, top down, stacked. It's such a shame how it's been lost to history.
Yeah, I think you can make the case. It's obviously it's a slippery slope when you start comparing it to, older teams, right? Like the Big Red Machine, the 27 Yankees, But, they were good. I mean, they were really good. And like I said, the depth of the lineup, as you pointed out, was really good. The pitching staff, the bullpen was pretty solid. The starting rotation was okay. They had Dave Stewart, who was a real big-game pitcher. Pat Hentgen was a nice young arm for them. Ironically, the only pitcher who was in the Hall of Fame, is not, didn't play very well.
Right. Jack Morris.
Jack Morris, thank you. He was escaping me for a second. He did not pitch very well, and he was left off the postseason roster. So he was kind of a non-factor at that stretch of the year. But, like you said, the offense was just incredible. And, I mean, it was really – there wasn't much of a race, down the stretch in the AL East. The Yankees were good. They faded in September kind of after the Jim Abbott no-hitter. And, the Tigers were pretty good with Cecil Fielder and Alan Trammell. The Red Sox certainly were not very good. They were kind of like a 500 team. Baltimore was around 500. So, it was kind of, again, Toronto's division to lose. They had a pretty interesting ALCS against the White Sox, 1 in 6 games. But, again, they were the class of this division. And the funny thing is, starting in 94, Toronto's horrible.
Yes.
They just go downhill precipitously. And then in 95, Alomar leaves, and, Joe Carter's on his way out. And quite frankly, the team's not really relevant for another 20 years or so.
Right.
Until the, Jose Bautista era. So, again, it's just interesting, I think, sometimes how you look at it and there's such a gap in terms of years or decades for the team's relevancy.
Well, for the longest time, you could say with 100% confidence, write it in ink, carve it in stone, this is what's going to happen. The Yankees are going to finish first in the AL East. The Red Sox are going to finish second. The Blue Jays are going to finish third. The Orioles are going to finish fourth. The Rays are going to finish fifth. That happened year after year after year, and then you guys, the Red Sox, decided to mess it up.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think a lot of, younger baseball fans, millennials, think, oh, Red Sox, Yankees, Red Sox, Yankees. But, back certainly in the late 80s, the Yankees, as you know, were not all that competitive. Certainly the Red Sox, in the Butch Hobson era, 92, 93, 94, not very competitive.
Joe Morgan, too.
Right, Joe Morgan also. So, I mean, it was the Blue Jays. And again, the AL East was different, though. You're talking about, the Detroit Tigers, okay, being a very good team and, being in that division.
Right.
The Milwaukee Brewers, not that they were that good, but they were in that division. So the alignment was very different. But, yeah, I mean, starting in the late 80s when, the Blue Jays made that massive trade to get Joe Carter and Robbie Alomar from the San Diego Padres, Blue Jays are one of the top teams. And they hadn't, until 92, they had never been to the World Series. They had kind of, they made the ALCS in 91, lost to the Twins, who ended up winning the World Series that year. So they had never really been, to that point yet.
Yeah, and then Cito Gaston got him there.
Yep.
Talking to David Ostrowsky, the author of Pro Sports in 1993, a signature season in football, basketball, hockey, and baseball. So would you be able to describe the 1993 Dallas Cowboys?
Yeah, it's a loaded question. And, I think the story probably starts in 89 when the Cowboys are, 88 actually. They're 3-13 under the legendary coach Tom Landry, who's getting up there in age, and they're not very good at all, to say the least. They have a young hotshot receiver in Michael Irvin. They have Herschel Walker, who's, probably their best offensive player, I would say, because they didn't have much of a quarterback situation then. So they go 3-13, and then they have a new owner. In beginning of 1989, Jerry Jones buys the team, and he gets rid of Tom Landry, and he brings in Jimmy Johnson. Okay, and they were former roommates in college. And Jimmy Johnson comes in, and he does not do a very good job coaching them in 89. In fact, they take a step backwards. They go 1-15. They trade Herschel Walker, and he has the foresight to trade him for future conditional draft picks. And I'll make a long story short. It just so happens that one of those draft picks turns out to be Emmitt Smith. Okay, so by 1993, they have Michael Irvin, Emmitt Smith, Troy Aikman, who was a rookie quarterback in 89. They're by far, the most dynamic trio in all of football. They've coming off a Super Bowl title in 92, which they won, of course, in January 93 against the Buffalo Bills. And they won 52-17. The game's most memorable probably for two things: Michael Jackson's halftime show, and then Leon Lett, showing the football at the end of the game when he was crossing the goal line and Don Beebe knocking it out of his hands. But what I'm trying to say is, right, the game was there was no competition.
It was a romp.
Right, exactly. So anyway, Dallas is best team in the league. They start the 93 season without Emmitt Smith. He's got a contract holdout. They get him back 2 games later, and they go 12-2 the rest of the way, and they end up winning a second straight Super Bowl. They beat the Cowboys again. I guess the point here is that Dallas was just so dominant over not only the Buffalo Bills for the second straight years, but their conference rival, the San Francisco 49ers, who once again they beat in the conference title game. And smart money is on them in winning the Super Bowl the next year at Joe Robbie Stadium in Miami, and winning the one after that, and so on and so forth, right? Jimmy Johnson's only in his early 50s. Aikman, Smith, Irvin, all on the right side of 30. That doesn't happen, of course. Johnson and Jerry Jones don't get along. They part ways. And the rest is history. Dallas wins one more Super Bowl under Barry Switzer 2 years later. And after that, never makes it back to an NFC conference title game. It sure as heck doesn't look like they're going to this year either. So,
oh, come on. In Cooper Rush, we trust.
So, yeah, I mean, basically, again, like I've been saying, you look back early mid-'90s for this team, that was their heyday, other than, of course, the late 70s.
Yeah.
And they really have not been that relevant since the mid-'90s, 93, 94, 95 era.
No, they haven't been, but those early 90s Cowboys teams were absolutely incredible. And you're right, they really, tore the whole thing down and built it back up. 1989, the Cowboys go 1-15. Troy Aikman didn't win a single game that year. He got hurt. Steve Walsh came in and won that only game. And this is the thing. Everyone, I'm a Jets fan. Would it be okay if I just went on a little bit of a tangent? Would that be okay?
Go for it.
Okay. Everyone points out that the Jets have a bunch of picks, just like the Cowboys had a bunch of picks back then. Fantastic. you can draw that comparison. Jimmy Johnson utilized those picks as well as you could have possibly dreamed of. Darren Woodson, Emmitt Smith, the trade for Alonzo Highsmith, Russell Maryland.
Yep.
Yeah, a bunch of
Novacek.
guys. Right, Jay Novacek, right. Here's the thing. Do you have faith? I'm not saying you specifically. Since you're in Massachusetts, I'm sure you're a Patriots fan. But to the listener, do you have faith that Joe Douglas is going to utilize those picks correctly? I'm not asking for a dynasty. That's a big ask. But do you have any faith that Joe Douglas can put together a competent draft class? Picks mean nothing unless you use them correctly. What's your response to that?
Well,
I know there's a lot there, but
yeah. Well, the leagues, it's very different, right? When you're talking about late 80s, right, there was Plan B free agency, which, for those of you who don't know, there was no unrestricted free agency, right? It was just a very different league. You know, there's been expansion of a couple teams since then, and I think what Dallas did in terms of going from 89 to 92, I mean, there were incremental improvements each year, 1 and 15, 3 and 13, 7 and 9, not 3 and 13, 11 and 5, and then, of course, the 13 and 3 year when they win the Super Bowl. I mean, it was quick. And, in fact, when you talk about Super Bowl 27 in Pasadena, the Michael Jackson game, they were not expected to be the Bills. People thought they were too young. Which was great bulletin board material, but, you know, they were being dismissed. And it was just really impressive. In 3 years, they go from being this laughingstock to easily being the best team in the NFL. And just having so much promise ahead of them.
It's, again, picks mean nothing unless you use them correctly. Johnson used them correctly, and hopefully Douglas can use them correctly, although I have no faith that he will. Jaded Jets fan. All right, David, I'll get you out on this. What can you tell us about one of the greatest games, if not the greatest game, in NFL history? All I need to say is 2 words: the comeback.
Yeah, imagine you're down 32 points well into the third quarter. You're missing your starting quarterback, your starting running back, arguably your best linebacker. And not only do you win, but you tie the game in a quarter, basically. So this is what happens to the Buffalo Bills on January 3rd, 1993. They're playing Houston, a team, run and shoot offense, Warren Moon, quarterback, that whole thing. And they're down 35-3 in the third quarter. Future Hall of Fame quarterback Jim Kelly is out. Frank Reich is in, the University of Maryland backup quarterback who led a similar comeback back in the day in 1984. And, it was just it's just the proudest moment in the franchise's history to be able to come back from that game. And, they forced overtime and then won it. And I don't know. I mean, I just don't know it'll ever happen again. As impressive as the Patriots' comeback was in the Super Bowl against the Falcons, 25 points down, and obviously the Giants and 49ers, that playoff game in 2002, I think it was a 24-point deficit. That was awfully impressive. And, it's happened in college with a greater deficit, but I don't know it'll happen again in the NFL where you're that deep into a game and you're down by almost 5 touchdowns and you come back and win. They had a couple of breaks. Don Beebe stepped out of bounds one time, and he was still ruled eligible. The ref didn't see it, and when he went to score a touchdown on one of the second half throws by Reich. But again, it's just one in a. Marv Levy said it best. It was like winning the New York lottery. After the game.
No, it was like winning the lottery. I'm with you. I don't think it'll ever happen again. 28-3 is fantastic, but 35-3 is better. I mean, I understand the stakes were a little lower with 35-3. It was a wild card game versus a Super Bowl, but 35-3 down midway through the third quarter. You come back, you outscore the Oilers 38-3. Think about that. That's incredible. I'm with you. I don't think that'll ever happen again.
Well, also just the fact that, it was cold and blustery day in Buffalo. Not that the players in Buffalo weren't used to that, of course, but a lot of their fans had left. I mean, the players said, look, they could really they knew that. They were aware they were getting, embarrassed on their field, and by halftime, early in the third quarter, fans were leaving. And of course, a lot of them came back because they started hopping the fence and whatever. Maybe they had tickets, maybe they didn't. But, it had to have been humiliating. And, a couple of players that acknowledged to me that, yeah, they were kind of making some jokes about, what they were going to do in terms of golfing next weekend, not to get hurt, screw up their ACL on what seemed like a meaningless game. I think it's only human nature to kind of have those thoughts, right? But, that's sports and anything can happen. And like I said, I think I know it's kind of cliche, but the never give up attitude, obviously I think that game really embodies that. And it's a nice lesson, to young athletes out there.
Right, exactly. And Frank Reich went on to quarterback the Jets in '96. That team obviously went 1-15, and we're not going to talk about that because it looks like they're going to go 0-16 this year.
I got the Patriots Monday night, so you never know.
Yeah, no, that's true too. All right, David, thank you very much for your time.
My pleasure.
All right, that was David Ostrowsky. His book is Pro Sports in 1993, a signature season in football, basketball, hockey, and baseball. Thanks for listening. Here comes the outro.
Thanks for the plug, Jacob from the past. It does mean a lot. Until tomorrow, I am Jacob Valk saying that third base is certainly a reactionary position.